Yeah, I know you've heard the old saying, if we were meant to fly, we'd have been given wings. Well, there may be some truth to that. Not that we aren't meant to fly, but flight is an environment that our bodies sometimes need a little help with. After all, that's why we have instruments in an airplane. So let's review the physiology of flight and emphasize those things that have to do with instrument flying. One consequence of flying on instruments is that you may be flying higher than you normally would in VFR flying. The MEAs in the western U.S. or the desire to stay above weather can add thousands of feet to your normal flight altitudes. And once you get to higher altitudes, you'll need to take two things into consideration: physiology and the regulations. Physiology comes into play in the form of hypoxia. As you know, hypoxia is caused by having an inadequate amount of oxygen reaching the brain. The result of this is that you become so stupid that you're too stupid to know that you're stupid. It's hard to know when you have hypoxia because the symptoms come on slowly and the effects tend to be subtle. Your judgment and ability to think are impaired. You can have headache, drowsiness, and dizziness. And you can have a deterioration in nighttime vision at altitudes as low as 5,000 feet. Some people become euphoric, and others become belligerent. For your safety and that of your passengers, you need to learn your own symptoms. That's why if you'll be doing much high-altitude flying, you should go for a ride in an altitude chamber sometime. In order to minimize these symptoms, especially airborne stupidity, and protect passengers, the FAA has come up with some rules for using supplemental oxygen. You'll notice these rules all apply to cabin pressure altitude. That refers to the air pressure in the cabin, not the air pressure in the outside air at the altitude which the airplane is flying. For instance, a pressurized airplane flying at 24,000 feet could have a cabin pressure altitude of only 8,000 feet. So if you're flying at cabin pressure altitudes of 12,500 feet and below, there is no requirement to use supplemental oxygen. So in that pressurized airplane we just described, there would be no requirement to use oxygen, even though the airplane was flying at 24,000 feet, because the pressure in the cabin would be as if the airplane were flying at 8,000 feet. When you're flying at cabin pressure altitudes above 12,500 feet, up to and including 14,000 feet, you as the pilot must use oxygen anytime you're there for more than 30 minutes. Above 14,000 feet cabin pressure altitude, you must use oxygen the entire time. And above 15,000 feet cabin pressure altitude, you must provide oxygen for your passengers. Your passengers don't have to use oxygen, but you must have it there for each of them. And it would be a pretty good idea to tell them how to use it. Now, these are the legal requirements, but a lot of folks feel that they're pretty lax. Your actual physiological requirement might dictate that you use oxygen at lower altitudes and for a longer time than the rules require. Now let's review hypoxia's wayward cousin, hyperventilation. Hyperventilation comes from breathing too fast, something you might do when under a lot of stress, like when you're anxious, scared, or worried. Thank goodness my passengers never tend to hyperventilate. Breathing, of course, is a good thing to do, but if you breathe too fast, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide, and that creates problems for your body. Carbon dioxide helps stimulate you to breathe and your heart to beat. The symptoms of hyperventilation can easily be confused with the symptoms of hypoxia. The symptoms of hyperventilation include lightheadedness, a sense of suffocation, drowsiness, tingling in the extremities, and chills. Eventually, you could pass out, and believe me, that does scare the dickens out of your passengers. The fix is very simple. Breathe more slowly. Other people say you should build up your carbon dioxide levels by recirculating your breath in, say, a six-sack. Just make sure it's empty. Now let's talk about how the information your eyes give you can sometimes toy with your brain. Popping out of the clouds close to an airport and in less than perfect visibility can set you up for some interesting landing illusions. Now, illusions are great fun when a magician is making your mother-in-law disappear, but landing illusions are no fun at all. And those that tend to make you fly lower than you normally would when you're making a landing approach are the least fun of all. A runway that is narrow in proportion to its length tends to make you think that you're looking at a normal width runway from a higher altitude. The result? You fly a low approach. The same illusion happens if the runway slopes upward. If you maneuver to make this runway appear normal, you'll fly a low approach. Rain on the windscreen and atmospheric haze can also create the illusion of greater height from the runway. And again, the pilot who doesn't recognize these illusions will tend to fly a lower approach. Featureless terrain like a wide, unbroken, snow-covered area or an over-water approach can also fool you into thinking you're high. So you end up flying a low approach. But the illusions aren't just confined to landings. Nature has a whole grab bag full of tricks to make your sensory organs send mixed up messages to your brain. Your inner ear and your kinesthetic sense can send very powerful but erroneous messages. When your eyes don't have anything to work with to keep things straightened out, your inner ear and your kinesthetic seat-of-the-pants sense can be easily fooled by flight forces. For instance, pitching down abruptly from a climb to level flight can give you the sensation that you're tumbling backward, and a rapid acceleration can make you think you're pitching up. Changing the angle of bank or rate of turn causes a change in the centrifugal force that your seat-of-the-pants sense feels and can make you feel that you're rising or falling. And speaking of turns, the granddaddy of illusions is the Coriolis illusion. This one can really bite you if you make an abrupt head movement during a prolonged turn. You can get a very powerful false sensation of banking or pitching and become very disoriented. Pilots have been known to turn an airplane every which way but loose, trying to stop this imaginary motion. So how do you deal with all this? You already know the answer. Focus on your instruments. Believe what you see there, and all will be well in a few seconds. The attitude indicator is truly the discombobulated aviator's friend here, since it needs the least amount of interpretation in this confusing situation. A different kind of illusion is the false horizon. If you can't see the actual horizon, your brain is quite willing to accept some weird substitutes. A sloping cloud deck is one. A line of lights in an otherwise dark area is another. Other examples, a fishing fleet with no shoreline behind it, or a freeway crossing the desert are good examples. All these can make you feel like you're not in level flight, and you may end up doing really weird things with the airplane, trying to align it with that false horizon. The cure is still the same. Concentrate on your flight instruments. Now, let's look at some issues related to your night vision. You like to be able to see things really well inside the cockpit. So should you turn up the interior lights to high intensity? Well, maybe not. That could destroy or delay your night vision adaptation. And that means when you pop out of the clouds on a dark night, you wouldn't see things outside the cockpit very well. The solution? Reduce the interior light to a level that lets you read the instruments comfortably, and use a red flashlight if you need to look for things in the cockpit. The red light will not destroy your dark adaptation. Don't forget, though, that the red light won't show the red or magenta printed material on VFR charts. How about the lights on the outside of the airplane? If you're in clouds or haze, your landing light, strobes, and rotating beacon can disorient you with their flashing. Plus, they can ruin your night adaptation by reflecting light back into the cockpit. It's legal to leave them off in the clouds if they distract you. And what about the lights at the airport? They can sometimes play the illusion game with you too. A really bright set of approach lights with no other lights around them can give the illusion that you are closer to the airport than you really are. And an absence of lights in the area surrounding the airport forms the infamous black hole illusion. This is just the nighttime version of the featureless terrain illusion that we talked about earlier, and it'll have the same effect. You'll think you're higher than you are, and there is a risk of flying into the ground if you're not careful. So, the moral of this tangled tale is always follow the rules for using oxygen and be aware of the black magic surrounding landings and other maneuvers in limited visibility. If you do, you'll be able to pull a safe flight out of the hat.